What's the worst thing you've stepped on with bare feet? I stepped on a nail trying to find the bathroom at a family friend's pool party. I didn't know what to do after seeing that the nail was halfway in my heel, so I just pulled it out, threw it away, and went on with my life. I didn't realize I was leaving a blood trail through the house until a random partygoer told me I was bleeding. I was 10 at the time. My mum's dog used to have pretty bad IBS, so accidents around the house weren't that uncommon. One day she had eaten a slug and passed it out the other end. Think of a slug perfectly encased in diarrhea. I stepped right in it. In bare feet. Dog shit and slug straight in between my toes like the worst kind of jelly. God, even thinking about it makes me want to heave. As I started hopping around the room violently gagging and begging my sister to help me, the whole thing was dangling off my foot. I stepped on a toad a little bit once. Fortunately, the surprising feeling of my bare foot touching toad skin instead of carpet made me jump away before I put my weight down on it. It was about 30 feet from the nearest exterior door. I don't know how it got into the house, but I was glad to put it outside intact. The other worst thing I've stepped on was a box staple. I got panicky and didn't want to pull it out of my foot. I'm not great in emergencies. Hopped out of the pool at a resort in the US. Headed over to the chair to towel off and had to veer around another couple and a couple sets of chairs. I slipped in something and nearly ate it in front of dozens of people. Once I was stable, I looked down and saw a brown pool behind the smear my foot left in it. There was more in the chair. Someone had shat themselves in the beach chair and waddled away leaking soft serve all over the pool deck. Fuck people saying Lego. Step in a sea urchin once, compared to that stepping in Lego is like walking on pillows. Edit, since people seem interested, I stepped in one as a kid. Some spines lodged into my foot, and broke off immediately, leaving me with a foot full of barbed spikes. One needle went completely through my little toe. They immediately caused an inflammation of my foot which hurts like hell. Before I got the needles removed, it felt like they kept wriggling around in my foot somehow. So technically I wasn't barefoot, but bear with me because it's pretty bad. In Hawaii there are these things called kiawe thorns, and they are goddamn brutal. Seriously, look them up. They get up to like 6 inches long, and the way they grow on the branches, there's always one sticking up when they are on the ground. Now, I was wearing inch-thick slip-paws, flip-flops for my haoles out there, so this thorn had to be at least 2.5 inches, because when I stepped on it, it went inside my foot and snapped off. I went to a doctor, and after digging around in my foot for a while, he determined that there was nothing more in there. He said give it time to heal, deep wounds take a while. Well, just a few days later, I was at one of those youth conferences where you walk around a lot. When I got home, my entire sock was soaked in blood, and the hole had reopened. My mom got some tweezers and pulled out an inch-long piece of thorn that had been in there the whole time. It was the greatest relief I have felt. My dad had a collection of shells, sand dollars, etc., and one of the items was an intact shark jaw with all the rows of teeth that he'd found snorkeling. My little sister pulled it down to look at it and didn't put it back, and when I came skipping into the room, well, let's say I remember it 25 years later. Absolutely tore my foot to shreds, and I was limping around with a massive bandage for days. But second to that is goddamn Legos. A thumbtack and some kind of sewing needle were probably what hurt the most, but the most surprising was something different. I was out playing on this lawn next to the apartment where I grew up. Suddenly we noticed that I was bleeding quite a lot from one of my feet as well as my hand. It turned out that the alcoholic/ex-mental patient next door had decided to throw out his Christmas ornaments in June, and I had both stepped on the shards and put my hand on them somehow. I don't remember it hurting at all, but there was quite a bit of blood. My kid had a little plastic spinning top. Really tiny, but the part you gripped to spin it was blunt, not rounded or pointy. I stepped on the top, it broke, I lifted my foot up and noticed a little bit of plastic stuck to it and brushed it off, but it didn't brush off after a couple swipes. I looked closer and realized the whole 1/4 inch long piece had been inserted into my skin, and what I was looking at was the bottom of where it had broken off of the rest of the top. It made sense why it hurt so bad. Once when I was a kid, my parents brought me on holiday to North Wales. My favorite part of it was the sand dunes. Little sand lizards ran across them. It was great. I was playing hide and seek with my family and running through the sand dunes. I realized my foot was warm and wet. I looked down and my foot was red and brown. At first I thought I stood on a nail or some glass, but I realized it didn't hurt. I retraced my steps, and on the floor in front of me I saw a dead cat, half rotten, and its stomach had caved in. It was especially traumatizing since I was 8. I cried back to my mom and couldn't sleep for a full hour. Later found out the cat had been missing for months and had been living off birds and lizards the whole time. It died of a parasite. A banana slug. I still think about this all the time. I was camping in the rainforest in BC, and I left my kayaking shoes, the wetsuit style tight-fitting kind, outside of my tent to dry overnight. I bet you can see where this is going. We woke up early in the morning to pack up and head out to our next campsite and, without thinking, I slid my feet back into my shoes without checking them first. Boy, I will never forget the sound, feeling, and smell of squishing down a giant banana slug with my bare foot. To this day I check the inside of my shoes every single time I put them on. Ugh. Sawzall blade. My husband left his sawzall under the kitchen table, blade side up sticking out. Ragged gash starting between big toe and second toe all the way to the arch of my foot. Husband, from the basement, here's fucking sawzall. Christopher, get your ass upstairs right now. Husband comes up in a huff thinking I'm just being a neat freak. I do bitch about him leaving tools in weird places, apparently for good reason. He finds me sitting in a puddle of blood on the linoleum. Instantaneous change from combative to sheepish. A rusted rebar sticking out from rocks on the edge of a reservoir when I was 16. A cop on a bike showed up scolding me and my cousin for swimming in it, while blood is rushing from the bottom of my foot all over a rock I was standing on. My mom told me to walk it off and it'll be fine. 3 days later, she took me to the DR and nope. Had to get some shots, then he opened the big wound and said it went almost to the bone. My mom watched in horror as he prodded it open to clean it out. A couple years back, after a large portion of my yard had flooded, my sisters and I went to mess around in the makeshift lake. In the middle of the puddle there's a decently sized brush pile with a bunch of twigs around it. I had stepped on some bark or something, hurt a bit, but it never bothered me after that time, so I brushed it off. I didn't really acknowledge the possibility of anything in my foot until like a month later when my family and I went shopping and I had a lot of pain in my foot, so we stopped for a bit to see what was up with it. Turns out it was a teeny tiny splinter that was barely visible if you didn't notice the red, raised skin surrounding it. We eventually bought some tweezers and then spent 5 minutes trying to find and pry it from my foot, all while my family repeatedly asking me how I didn't realize the splinter was there earlier. Good times LOL. The sharp edge of a dog crate we had at the time. I backed into it while playing with said dog. It cut the back of my left foot. It bled for a while, but we were leaving for school the very next day, so we just wrapped it up and forgot about it. A month later and it just refused to heal, so I finally went to an urgent care. Only to be told I should have gone in for stitches, but it was too late for that. So she got my tetanus shot and prescribed antibiotics and flip-flops. She actually prescribed flip-flops, because my sandals and tennis shoes were irritating the wound, and that's why it couldn't heal. It's a nice little scar on my heel. I'm sure everyone has either stepped on or imagined stepping on something that goes through your foot and is extremely painful, but can you imagine being blackout drunk and making it to bed safely only to wake up feeling like you time traveled and have to run to the bathroom in the middle of the night barefoot and step into the warmest freshest piece of human shit that smears in between all of your toes? The scariest part was that I lived alone and to my knowledge there was no one else in my house. No dogs and definitely no one there after dealing with the situation. I was and am still stuck with the thoughts of, did I shit on my own floor before passing out? Or did someone sneak in, shit on my floor, and leave without me knowing? I still don't know the truth. It is the worst thing I have ever stepped on and can't think of anything worse. LOL. Wow, I have some competitors for this. One time I stepped clean in fresh dog shit, slipped and fell, falling in the dog shit. And then when I was trying to clean up enough to walk into the house for a shower, I got pooped on by a bird. As a kid I went to the beach and was fooling around with my sister. We ran through some tall grass in the sand, and next thing I know my feet hurt like high hell. I spent over an hour sitting in the car as my mother and father tried to extract some weird prickly plant from my feet. The big chunks came out, but then there were a bunch of splinters stuck in my foot, and they had to carefully remove them. Yet I was scared to go barefoot anywhere for a while after that. And then my brother, during a game of hide and seek as kids, came to find me in the garage. I was hiding behind some boxes and was giggling and whatnot, and he thought it was a good idea to try and scare me. Well, my father's tools were lying around the floor, so when he tried to jump scare me he ended up stepping clean on a hammer, on the sharp end. Pierced the bottom of his foot, bled like a bitch, and he was rushed to the hospital. He had to get numerous stitches. As a child, I was eerily detached from the whole thing and found all the blood super interesting. I also was upset that my brother had to leave and stop playing with my sister, and I thoughts were ranging around, what a pussy. I was once carrying a heavy air conditioner up a flight of stairs by myself. I started to fall backwards, and having no hands free to steady myself I came down hard on one foot. That foot fell on the prongs at the end of the axe cord, facing up. The ground didn't go in, just left a nasty bruise, but the other two prongs partially entered my foot. What with the extra weight from the AC and from the fall, the bruising was horrific, long-lasting, and painful. The accident itself was hard, and embarrassing, to explain. I was doing a coral reef survey a few years ago and we were recommended to always wear water shoes. The problem was I had two open wounds on the tops of my feet and sliding on the sandy, damp water shoes kept reopening the cuts and they were getting infected. So I decided one day to just not wear them and thought, the boats are only a few feet away, what's the worst that could happen? The answer was two sea urchin spines so deep in both of the bottom of my feet that I had to wait for them to dissolve. 2 years ago, we were packing up in preparation to move to a new house. Boxes everywhere. Since we live in Southern California and it almost never rains, we had a few empty boxes out on the back porch waiting to be filled. One morning, I was serving my kids breakfast and I felt something smush under my foot. I assumed it was a morsel of food one of them had dropped. Nope. Shit. I assumed it had come from one of our two cats, although it looked markedly different in color and size, etc. I freaked and bolted for the shower to scrub myself clean. 3 days later, my husband had just finished putting the kids to bed for the night, and as he was coming into the dining room, he let out a shriek. "There's a possum in the house." I scrambled into the room, and sure enough, there was a possum with a complete WTAF look on its face huddled under my daughter's car seat. My husband grabbed a foam tube and chased it around the house yelling, "Get out, get out, get out, get out." I yanked the front door open and the poor thing scurried out into the night. My husband slammed the door shut and we stared wordlessly at each other for a minute, then we burst out into hysterical laughter, because what else could we have done in that moment? I scrambled into the room, and sure enough, there was a possum with a complete WTAF look on its face huddled under my daughter's car seat. My husband grabbed a foam tube and chased it around the house yelling, "Get out, get out, get out, get out!" I yanked the front door open and the poor thing scurried out into the night. My husband slammed the door shut and we stared wordlessly at each other for a minute, then we burst out into hysterical laughter, because what else could we have done in that moment? We quickly put the pieces together. The possum had to have jumped into one of the empty boxes on the porch, and we brought the box inside, not knowing it was occupied. The shit pile I stepped in was from the possum, not the cat's, which means the thing had lived in our house for 3 goddamn days before we found it. Crazy, but true. Postscript: the very next morning my husband flew overseas for work and the kids and I flew cross-country to visit family. We were gone to our respective destinations for 2 weeks. When we got home, the house was infested with fleas. It took Orkin 3 trips to get rid of them. Hence I have a grudge against possums that will probably last until my dying day. I'm not about to hurt one, but I'll sure as hell do my best to chase it away if I ever spot it in my yard. TLDR, don't walk barefoot on old wooden planks. And listen to your instincts. I live in Florida close to a beach, river, and animal sanctuaries and like to go to them often. All the beaches have wooden boardwalks, the river has piers over the water made of wood, and the animal sanctuaries have wooden boardwalks as well. My whole life I have had this compulsion to never walk on boardwalks with bare feet out of fear that I may get splinters in my feet from the old wooden boards, but it had never actually happened to me, it was just a precaution. Until my fear came true. I was with a girlfriend and her family for some holiday at her uncle's house, who lives on the river and has his own small wooden pier/boat dock in his backyard, which was where everyone was spending their time, so I had to be on the dock as well. My compulsion was still there and I hated every second on that dock without shoes, but I did it anyway just to not look weird being the only one wearing shoes, and then, it happened. The bottom of my foot caught a splintered piece off of the corner of one of the 2x4 wooden planks and went about an inch or so into my foot, but the other 6 inches of wood that was sticking out of my foot was what really got to me. Just thinking about it makes me cringe. I mean, it's not quite stepped on, but I was trying to fix my dad's computer while he was out of town since it ran our internet. It was full-size, solid steel server tower. One of the nice Asus cases. It also had these brutal freaking corners that jut out at the perfect toe-obliterating angle. I have the most impeccable, nearly inhuman ability to walk into things. Doorknobs, walls, pretty much if it protrudes at all I am somehow guaranteed to barrel right into it at full force. Well, I did that with the case and my pinky toe. I'm not a small chick. I weigh 180 pounds and most of it's muscle in my legs, so I basically just drop-kicked the damn case sideways with just my toe and broke my pinky toe into a bloody mess. Holy hell, that hurt. I kinda have L-shaped pinky toes from the constant abuse, but that was by far the worst. I was in middle school and on a week-long trip to our family friend's lakeside cabin. The second day there, my friends were jumping off the balcony by their dock into the lake. Something they had done their entire life without their parents caring. I decided to get brave and do the same. I did not even consider I weighed more than my friends and was freakishly tall for my age. I jumped. Hit bottom hard. Came up with a slice through the bottom of my foot that was deep. My dad jumped into the water to see what I hit since it was supposed to be a sand bottom. He came up with a rusty propeller that I just happened to nail perfectly. Had to rush into town to get stitched up. Luckily, had already had tetanus shots prior. Nobody was allowed to jump there again for obvious reasons. I spent the rest of the week watching everyone wakeboard and waterski. Yeah. That sucked. Perfect. This was later last year, I think it was during the summer. We got 2 new chicks, and since we already had chickens as pets years before I decided to prepare a box for them, I used to walk around barefoot at home, but I never seemed to step on something sharp. Well, to prepare their box I decided to walk around our hill gathering crap I might have been able to use. Well, not even a bit after I step onto the hill I reach an area where there are many thorns. You know where this is going, I took a step and got stabbed with multiple thorns, that hurt badly by itself. I had to find a spot to sit to take them out, and remember how I told you it was summer? Yeah, it was very hot that day, which meant the dirt was scorching hot. The worst part, when I pulled one thorn out, quite a bit of blood gushed out. I was now on a hill, it was hot outside, the sand was burning my feet and I was bleeding from some thorns that I stepped on. It felt so hopeless, especially since I now had to walk back up the hill. When I finally arrived at the house, I barged in cursing because of the pain. Luckily a friend of ours was over and he had wipes from a bag of food he bought. It was definitely the worst thing I've experienced barefoot, which is why I don't walk around barefoot anymore at my house.